pleasure to open this last seminar we are organizing jointly together with the Polish Embassy in Mexico. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Ambassador Maciej Ziętara, who is with us today. So I'd like to thank him for also having a patronage auspices over this event, and the two institutions that are providing researchers to these seminars are Poznań University of Economics and Business, and in particular the Institute of International Business and Economics and Department of European Studies. And we have also UNAM, Institute for Economic Research, and I'd like also to welcome the chief of the institute, Professor Armando Sanchez Vargas. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Isalia Nava Bolaños, who is in charge of organizing the whole series of the seminars. And today's seminar will be focused on sustainability lessons from COVID-19. So we are just heading to another topic that is related to the pandemic, because we've been discussing how the situation impacted on Latin America and Europe, and we had and provided a comparative perspective on a different economic, political, and societal issue. So I'd like also to thank to our rector of the university, who is the second person who gave the patronage to this event. And I'd like also to mention a former counselor of the embassy, Dr. Michał Faryś, who started to organize these events with us, and now to Ms. Zofia Ziółkowska, who is in charge of this last seminar. So thank you all for contributing to these seminars. And now, without waiting any longer, I'd like to say that the event is organized as in the same format as the previous events, which means that we will have two presenters, one from our university and the second one from UNAM. And I will present the moderator of the debate, who is Professor Andrés Blancasneria. And please let me briefly introduce Professor. Professor Andrés Blancasneria got his PhD in economics from the New School for Social Research in New York. He's a researcher at the Institute of Economic Research at the National University of Mexico in the area of applied economics. He has the level 1 of the National Research System, and his topics of interest are economic policy, development financing, and computable general equilibrium models. He's a professor of economic theory and advisor of the graduate faculty of economics at UNAM. So, Professor, I'd like the floor now to you, and you'll be in charge of moderating, presenting our wonderful speakers, and also leading the discussion. Thank you.
What is the next?
Andrés, you can continue, please.
With the presentation of the event, of the expositors. Okay.
Yes, Alonso. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I lost my contact. So, but let me introduce to the participants. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. And today we have the participation of two economists. The first one is Alonso Aguilar, who's he is a, oh, excuse me. Professor Alonso Aguilar Ibarra is a full-time researcher and professor in economics and the environment at the Institute of Economic Research, UNAM, Mexico. He obtained his PhD degree on agronomic science at Institut National Polytechnique of Toulouse, France. He has a multidisciplinary academic background, and his interests are therefore to understand and analyze both the ecological and economic processes which influence the environment and human societies. Current projects involve the analysis of ecosystem services, economic evaluation, assessment, and policy guidance. He teaches at the Economic and Sustainability Science graduate program at UNAM. In this occasion, Professor Aguilar is going to talk about oops. What are the effects of COVID-19 on the fisheries sector? Professor Alonso Aguilar, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Andrés. I appreciate this invitation for sharing some thoughts on the fishery sector and the COVID-19 pandemic. I prepared a brief presentation. I will share a screen in right here. Okay. Okay, I prepared a mini review of what has been published during the past few months on the fishery sector and the pandemic. And what I will talk about is this summary, and that I have classified into several effects on different topics. First, I will give a very brief introduction and then talk about the management system and fisheries, then the effects on the natural system, and then the extraction, production, and consumption systems. And then just to finish with a couple of final thoughts. Okay, this fishery sector is important to society because people can have food security from a very direct point of view, nourishing themselves directly after fishing, or by fishing and then selling this catch into markets that can give them some income in order to buy some other foodstuffs or many other things to make a living. According to the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, about more than 7 billion people obtain their protein intake from fish products in at least 15% of their total food intake. This means that billions of people depend on this sector, and it is not just for nourishment, but also for livelihoods and a way of living. These are just figures that I obtained from the USA, just to give a general panorama of the uses of the catches in the United States, but also elsewhere. And we can notice that there are several forms of using fish, and it's not just for humans, but also for animals, which finally will nourish human beings. Another important fact is that most of the catch in absolute terms, in number of people, comes from small-scale fisheries, or artisanal fisheries. As in the photograph, we can see those small boats that are used in some artisanal fisheries that help entire communities, coastal communities, either for freshwater or coastal waters all around the world. And this is a big sector on a local basis. Okay, I have recorded some of effects that have been written down on several papers. It's not an extensive review, it's a very brief one, but I want to highlight some of the main effects on several issues. The first issue is on the management system. Literature has reported that as in other activities and as in our daily lives also, a lot of meetings have been postponed or even canceled. And some have been held like right now we are doing. But the problem is that some regional or local decision-making will be very difficult in certain contexts for local fisheries. And then this reprogramming will be a little bit difficult in order to cope with the effects of postponing certain meetings. Meetings like, for example, setting up closures on several fisheries. Another important thing, a more general thing, is that sustainable development goals that have been set up for complying with Agenda 2030 will be delayed, or it will be very difficult to achieve. It is not only for the fishery sector or the coastal communities. The problem is that this virus is affecting a lot of this achievement of goals that will inevitably affect the fishery sector. And this postponing of achieving those goals will make a more difficult task for authorities and local communities to cope with this resilience needed for overcoming the pandemic. Okay, with respect to natural ecosystems, we have observed literature has reported that there have been some improvements on the water quality. We can see diminishing suspended matter, diminishing turbidity and nutrient concentration, as well as microbial levels, and an increase in dissolved oxygen levels, an increase in both biodiversity and quantities or densities in phytoplankton, ichthyoplankton, and even fish proper. Then those are improvements in aquatic ecosystems. However, this pandemic has to be dealt with a lot of plastic, and a lot of waste has been dumped into oceans and water bodies like rivers or lakes. And this is having a big effect and will continue because degradation times for this kind of material is extends to a very long periods. So this is a problem that we have to deal with in the future, in the near and the midterm future. Okay, as I was saying a little bit earlier, small-scale fisheries are the most frequent way of living of many fishers all around the globe, and they have been the most affected. It is not only fishermen, but their families and communities. Things like this illness, reduced income, complication for producing and distributing, selling the products, this weak value chains, and lowering consumer demand, etc. The problem is that many of the coastal communities lack of health services and that has been a problem because getting this aid, this medical aid, in a proper time for overcoming COVID-19 has been a big challenge for these communities. And in many cases, some desperate fishermen have to go into the illegal activities, risking not only their personal health, but even their liberty, because they have to look for illegal fishing. Okay, if we look at the fresh catches, this paper has recorded these declines in the trade system, both in imports and exports have been reduced. And these are the figures that have been reported. More than about 40% less in both catches and trade, either imports and exports. This is about the fresh seafood that is mostly caught by small-scale fishermen. In contrast, there is a big increase, about 270% in delivering takeout seafood. And this is in relation mostly with more industrial fisheries, which have more facilities, even on board of boats, for canning, for frozening products, and that helps the trade of such products. Here we are talking about the big industry, with this increase in trade and consumption. In contrast, it is shown with the fresh seafood from artisanal and small-scale fishermen. Just an example is that this spiny lobster market that has been stopped in China, because China is a big importer, and several countries, including Mexico, that are have been affected into exporting spiny lobster into China since final days of 2019. And so it's just an example that has been recorded in the literature. Okay, just we'll finish with some thoughts, just remembering that this small-scale fisheries dependent communities where they have to trade to local sellers have been the most affected, and mostly because of the difficulties of dealing with fresh products. There are some positive outcomes that are more local in certain contexts, that maybe this setting up of local networks for selling and distributing the fresh products has been increased and helping the local places. This has been the case of several communities in Asia, for example. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay, and have a good day. We will stop sharing then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Alonso. Your exposition, your topics is interesting, because we have not only the problem of the economic crisis as general phenomena just before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, and now after the pandemic, effects of the economic issues is very important. So the fishing is one of the sector most important issues in the economic, and you are dealing with this topic, and you argue that the reduction of the production and consumption and some important sectors, some important activities and products of the fishing. And I have here some questions. The first one is there any available information on how the pandemic has affected the livelihoods of Mexican fishermen? If you want to answer, or I can give you the another set of questions. Or do you prefer to answer this, or I can tell you the another one?
Okay, yes, I guess that I can answer that. There are some reports that have been that I read about Mexicans, is mostly from an ONG that works on the Mexican Pacific. It's this ONG is Comunidad y Diversidad. In English is Community and Biodiversity, that have reported some similar problems as I have shown in the papers I reviewed. And yeah, the problem is mostly with dealing with the trade, the local trade of small-scale fishermen, and the dealing with health issues, how to access medical care, proper medical care for COVID-19 in coastal communities which are far away from big cities. Those are the most, the big problems in Mexican fisheries, which have been observed elsewhere.
Okay. We can change a little bit this set of questions. let me introduce to Aleksandra, and then we come back to the set of questions for both together, right? Do you agree? Okay. Professor Aleksandra Gaweł. Aleksandra Gaweł is, excuse me?
No.
Is Gaweł or Gaweł?
Gaweł. You pronounced very well.
Gaweł, sorry. Professor Aleksandra Gaweł is a professor of economics at the Poznan University of Economics and Business in Poland. She received his PhD in 1997, habilitation postdoc degree in 2008, and professorship of economic science from the President of Poland in 2015. She is the author of, or co-author of publications on entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial education, innovation, the business cycle, the labor market, and regional development. Her current research is focused on the sustainable aspects of entrepreneurship, mostly in the context of social and gender equality. The topic that she is talking about is necessity or opportunity driving female entrepreneurship. Can COVID-19 pandemic reduce the gender gap in entrepreneurship in Europe? Go ahead, Professor Aleksandra.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome all of you, and let me share my presentation. Okay, I suppose I cannot share the presentation. I don't know how to deal with this. When I clicked, I got information that I cannot share. Ida, could you?
Can you help her to share the
help me with sharing the presentation? Because when okay, it's okay.
Do anybody help her to share?
Yeah, now I can. It was
you got it, Aleksandra.
Yes,
you are
yes,
sharing now.
Yes. It looks that
Ready.
that I started to share my presentation. True, one of the latest research interest of mine is related to female entrepreneurship. As in my opinion, to some extent, this is a part of the social pillar of, or the combination of social and economic pillars of sustainability, as it was even recalled in the previous presentation, that within the Sustainable Development Goals, the goal number 5 is related to the gender equality. And what is interesting, what is intriguing, what is still unexplained is that whenever we take a look at and analyze the society of entrepreneurs, there is a persistent gender gap in entrepreneurship. More or less about 1/3 of entrepreneurs are females. And this gender gap in entrepreneurship is, I'm talking about a European Union countries. I'm not talking about the whole world, just from our European perspective. But what is also important is that this gender gap in entrepreneurship is persistent. And this means that similar level of gender gap as it's now. It used to be 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So it still this still exists. So my question was, or the question which I would like to face right now, to try to definitely not to answer, but just to tackle, is to take a look how the current pandemic impact the female entrepreneurship in European Union countries. My idea for the presentation is a little bit different, because I wish to show you some data which I arranged from the Eurostat, European Statistical Office, and just to introduce the problem of the gender gap in entrepreneurship is that, as I mentioned, this persistence of gender gap is observed, and actually there is no generally accepted explanation of this of the gender gap in entrepreneurship. And we could say that some theories which try to explain the female entrepreneurship level based on, I would call it, gender neutral factors, such as, for example, need for achievement and propensity toward risk, which is independent from the gender. But on the other hand, some other theories try to explain this female entrepreneurship rate and this gender gap in entrepreneurship by using the gender specific, the female specific factor. And the idea which I implement in the title of the presentation is related to the theory of occupational choice, which assume that all of us will choose whether we prefer to be active, I mean professionally active, as employees or as entrepreneurs, and based on some factors which impact our decision, we can say that there are two main two main kinds of motivation to be entrepreneur: necessity-driven and opportunity-driven motivations. Extremely shortly, necessity-driven motivation or necessity-driven factors or theory assumes that someone wish, in this context, female wish to or decide to enter entrepreneurship because people think that they have to, that they have no other choice, and they treat being entrepreneur as something not because they wish to, but because they have to do, and they are negatively driven by some situation. On the other hand, we've got the idea of opportunity-driven motivation theories, which assumes that people are driven by positive motivation, by positive factors, both from the economic situation and from the social support of society, etc., etc. And when we say about some female-specific theories, the most important and most often used to try to explain this gender gap is institutional theory or institutional theories, mostly with the important role of culture norms, social norms, which push push females rather to pay employment instead of being entrepreneurs. To some extent, these female-specific factors are also related to labor market segmentation or segregation, which means that some people, in this case females, are pushed to some segments on the labor market. And the question which is interesting for me and which I wanted to share with you is how the pandemic could impact and can impact the economy, and by that, how can it impact on female entrepreneurs? Because from a theoretical point of view, it might be perceived a necessity-driven factor, as necessity because of the worsening of economic situation, because of the increase of unemployment, because of the reduction of some of some positions at labor market. Female could feel to be pushed to entrepreneurship. On the other hand, also there are also some opportunities related to COVID, related to pandemic, as some industries are including, for example, ICT industry are beneficiary for the pandemic, and pandemic was a factor which led some industries to develop. So from that perspective, there are also some new opportunities which might, theoretically speaking, impact the females' decision to enter pandemic. Just to start a discussion, to give you some data, to give you some big picture, how it looked shortly before the pandemic, or at the very beginning of the pandemic. I wanted to show you some data, which means the share of females in self-employment. I call it as female entrepreneurship rates. It was calculated as the share of females in the total number of self-employed. And here our numbers are the values of these rates for European Union countries. As you can see, the differences are still quite among countries. European Union countries are quite high. Were quite high because these data are for the last quarter of 2019, so shortly before the pandemic started. And as you can see, in some countries, the females were just one fourth of entrepreneurs. At about 25% of entrepreneurs were females. In some other countries, females consist of about 40% of entrepreneurs, but on average, more or less, as I mentioned at the very beginning, about 1/3 of entrepreneurs are female. And what is in this context of COVID, what is also important is to take a look how what is the female participation in industries. It's not, these data which I'm sharing with you right now are not related to entrepreneurship, but related to the total employment. No matter if these people are employees or entrepreneurs, but total employment. I wanted to show you these numbers to let us realize that in some industries, females are underrepresented or overrepresented. It's important from this point of view that COVID-19 is different. There are some industries which were definitely hurted much by COVID-19. But on the other hand, there are also some industries which were beneficiaries from that situation. And to make this let's say classification a little bit more precisely, I wanted to show you this from the point of view of male female-dominated industries and gender-neutral industries, or in other words, mixed industries. As in male-dominated industries, just females are less than 30% of all employed people, and in female-dominated industries, females are more than 60% of total employment. And as we can see, I highlighted 2 examples, or actually 3 examples of industries. On one hand, I highlighted the industry, ICT industry, which definitely developed very fast during the pandemic. And we can see that this industry is definitely one of the male-dominated industry with female participation rates just about 30%. On the other hand, second example highlighted in green, in red, accommodation and food service activities, which is neutral, gender neutral industry, but it is one of these industry which suffered a lot in during the pandemic because of the lockdown. But what I also wanted to highlight is that at least 2 of industries which were very which face huge challenges during the pandemic. So education and healthcare and social work activities are definitely female dominated. So no matter some other aspects of the pandemic, lockdowns and online education, etc., definitely females are overrepresented in these industries, for which pandemic is still a huge challenge. And I wanted to check after 1 year of the pandemic, I wanted to check how the female entrepreneurship rates changed in European Union countries during this pandemic. So this data, which I'm sharing with you right now, assuming that that we take a look at how this female entrepreneurship rates changed in fourth quarter of 2020, comparing to the fourth quarter of 2019. So at the beginning and after the first year of pandemic. And as you can see, it's quite interesting because in part of European Union countries, we can observe that the female entrepreneurship rates decreased during this first year of pandemics. There are some countries where more or less the female entrepreneurship rates were at the similar level. But on the other hand, there are also some countries where in which this female entrepreneurship rates rise during the first or after the first year of pandemic. So the general picture is not so obvious, and my question, how it can this pandemic be a kind of an impulse to reduce the female entrepreneurship rate is still open, is still unanswered. But to try to go a little bit deeper in this problem, I take a look and I compare these changes in female entrepreneurship rights with the changes in some most basic economic measures, variables. And the first one is this picture I'm sharing with you right now shows the changes in GDP, the way of calculating is actually the same as these changes in female entrepreneurship rate. So I assume that the third quarter of 2019 was 100%, and I calculated these changes in GDP in the after the first year of pandemic. And again, you can see that more or less half of European Union countries faces the reduction of GDP. But there are also some other countries which managed to observe the increase of GDP. And as one of the most important problem from economic point of view was lockdown, and was the problem that borders were closed or are closed or were closed, and there were some problems with moving. Even now, before our today's discussion, you discussed about possibilities of traveling from country to country and still unsolved. So that's why I wanted to take a look how it impacted the export and import activities. And all source of my data are from, I took all data from Eurostat, from European Statistical Office. So when we take a look at changes in export, we see that as the same story as with GDP, most of European Union countries faces the decrease in export, but still some other countries manage to observe the increase of export. And similar situation in imports. So the countries, to some extent, they close borders for importing goods and services. But the last thing which I wanted to show is that I made some calculations. My research attitude is at the macro level, at the country level, not at the level of company or the level of. So that's why, with such a limited number of data, it is quite difficult to make deep calculations. But I wish to. And I did cluster analysis to group countries with some homogeneous reactions of female entrepreneurship on the changes in export and import activities. So based on the world's minimum variance technique, with the assumption that the significance level should be not lower than 5%, I try to determine the number of clusters and the number of clusters and the cluster members. And this technique led me to identify four clusters of countries. And actually, in the most often reaction, which was observed in European Union countries, are in the cluster number 2 and in the cluster number 4. The first one represented by 13 countries and the second one by 10 countries. So actually, truly speaking, most of European Union countries react in this way, that they observe the decrease in export level and import level, and in consequence, or at the same time, they observe the decrease in female entrepreneurship rates as well. So the difference among these two clusters is that in this cluster number 2, the most common is that this increase in export, import, and female entrepreneurship rates were not very low. It was just about 1%, 2%, not more. But the cluster number 4, with the same reaction but much deeper reaction, so the import and export increases on average more or less about 10%, but it impacts on much higher reduction of female entrepreneurship rate. But four countries created, let's say, or let it be grouped into other clusters, which in my opinion is quite interesting, because we could observe a cluster with where the female entrepreneurship rates increased, but it was correlated. It was a coincidence, or it went through with the increase of export and protection of or reduction of imports, so the protection of domestic market. And what we can say, or we can assume or suppose is that the reduction of import led to create the opportunities for entrepreneurs, for females to fulfill this local expectation, together with the possibilities to sell products and services abroad. And the last cluster, which I would want to discuss for a moment, is the cluster number 3, and the situation in this cluster in these two countries were like this: that on one hand the export increased, but it was also observed with a quite high increase of import, and altogether it was observed together with the highest actually decrease of female entrepreneurship rates. So we could observe that, summing up, that in most of European countries the level of economy openness was reduced, and together with the reduction of female entrepreneurship rates. However, in some other countries, the situation was different, and depending on the changes in export and import, some countries faces the increase in female entrepreneurship rates or decrease in female entrepreneurship. Thank you very much. This is what I wish to show you as the, let's say, big picture of how the female entrepreneurship reacted on the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra, for your exposition. It's a very interesting, like, also the exposition or topic of Alonso. We can say about your topics that it's this is a very important issue in the economic theory that you post in the theoretical terms, and also in the empirical investigation. It's very difficult to incorporate, to add the gender analysis in this context. If we add the pandemic effects, so we are adding an additional problem. And you pointed out that the female labor participation is concentrated almost in services, education, and other services, and also in health services. The female labor is reducing in manufacturing activities, and the cluster analysis that you present is also interesting. Now we can open the questions about both participants of this event. If someone has some question, we can ask him. I have a couple of questions. We can start, or we can continue the questions with Aleksandra, and then finish with Alonso as we program this event. So some question, Aleksandra. Which type of female entrepreneurship, necessity or opportunity driven, is dominated in Europe? The second question, are there any geographical similarities in the response of female entrepreneurship to the COVID-19 pandemic? And the third question, in your opinion, which theory does explain the gender gap in entrepreneurship in the best manner? That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. I also saw a question or questions in the chat, but looking at just looking at the data and at this first reaction, which can be analyzed right now, it rather saw that this first reaction rather showed up it's opportunity-driven entrepreneurship than the necessity-driven entrepreneurship regarding the female situation, because we face the quite difficult time, and it's which means that the number of business opportunity is generally is much smaller than it used to be, and then it is normally. So that's why the most often situation that the female entrepreneurship rate is reduced, is lower. Let me to assume that it's rather the opportunity-driven reaction. And when we take a look, answering the second question, when we take a look at how the changes, what are the similarities in the changes of female entrepreneurship rates in European countries, actually it's hard to find any geographical and cultural similarities. For example, Latvia is the country with the highest increase in female entrepreneurship, and Estonia, a neighboring country, is the country with the lowest change. I mean the highest decrease. So even comparing these two, the highest and the lowest changes in female entrepreneurship rates, shows that it's not necessarily, there are not necessarily the similar reactions of neighboring countries or countries from the same culture group or from the same region of the same region. So when I try to answer the question about the which theory, gender neutral or female specific, explain the female the gender gap in entrepreneurship, actually it looks that I feel closer to this gender specific or female specific theories, because if it's just a question of gender neutral factors, the changes in male and female entrepreneurship rights would be the same. So, it's led me to assume that it's rather a question of some gender specific issue.
Okay, Aleksandra, we have here some additional questions from the participants in the audience. For instance, Jedith Betsabe Guillén Fernandez asked you, are there some kind of specific and public finance tools or support schemes in Europe and Poland that could effectively remove the gender gaps regarding female entrepreneurship? What about in rural areas?
Very interesting question. Thank you very much for asking me that. And it's quite difficult to answer this question, because within the policy of gender equality, it is all the, or actually perhaps not all, but most of the public support for entrepreneurs is dedicated for all genders, not specific to support females or males. Some programs, but when I try to figure out these programs which are dedicated just and only for females, for female entrepreneurs, they're quite limited, and if any, they are delivered by some associations for female entrepreneurship. But generally, because with entrepreneurship, the situation is that people start to by entrepreneurship, I mean running on business. People are free to start their own business. They make these decisions as independent individuals. So that's why it might be so tough, so difficult to reduce this gender gap in female entrepreneurship, because no policy can make an how to call it an specific extra benefits for females. It would be against the idea of equality. So, but regarding the rural areas, entrepreneurship in rural areas, females are more or less about the 30 of entrepreneurs in this. The same story as in other industries, but rural areas are mostly generally for all, not necessarily just for females.
Okay. Thank you. Alonso Aguilar also is asking you an additional question. Are the male domination industries a generalized pattern all over Europe? Are there any countries where this male dominance is significantly lower or higher than the data you presented?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, it looks that it's a question.
Actually,
I
two
don't know.
questions.
It's a question for me because because it's the question. Only let me take a look. It's one question to Dr. Alfonso.
Yeah.
Yeah, on what have been the main issues to include in the international agenda among the different countries' problems, and to me about male and female dominated industries. So this the data which I show about this male and female dominated industries were calculated through all European Union countries, not divided by countries, but more or less in most country situation looks similar. So there are some countries with where, as we see, for example, in East Europe, in Baltic countries, there are more entrepreneurs but there are more females among entrepreneurs. But this pattern is that we've got still some male-dominated and some female-dominated industry can be observed through the whole the European Union country.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aleksandra. Finally, I would like to ask you, Aleksandra, some question. When you talk about the theoretical backgrounds of the gender problem in this post-pandemic situation, are you talking about the traditional economic theory? I mean, the orthodox and heterodox point of view, or do you have some specific theoretical argument?
The heterodox theory would say that everyone, no matter the gender, choose the best solution for them. And actually, the mainstream of sorry, could you please repeat the question, because I've got the impression that I started to answer something else. Could you please answer the question? Could you please repeat the question?
Yes, you are adding or considering the theoretical aspects of your topic about the female participation in the labor entrepreneurship. So my question is, if you are considering this theoretical background, the heterodox or the orthodox economic theory, or are you classifying this theoretical background in some of both orthodox or heterodox economic theory?
Actually, it's interesting point, because from the, let's say, human capital theory point of view, from the point of view of theory of neoclassical economy, whenever anyone feels to be discriminated, she should prefer some or undertake some actions which make them to live better. So it's this orthodox, let's say, theory should give other answer that we can see in data, because, for example, the still in Europe is the pay gap is in gender pay gap is observed. No matter the goals of gender equality. So from that point of view, and if we follow this orthodox theories, it should such pay gap when we compare female and male salaries or wages should push females to choose entrepreneurship, as being independent entrepreneur means that the gender the entrepreneurs earn as much as they can, depending how well they manage to manage the company. So this gender pay gap, the difference in salaries, from the orthodox point of view, should be a factor which push females to enter the entrepreneurship. But and actually, this is my background. I started my academic career with teaching microeconomics. So this way of thinking is very close to my, let's say, attitude. But actually, data says that at least in European Union country, it doesn't look like this. So it's still, even the gender pay gap exists. So female receive lower salaries for the same job, or the job for the same quality than men. Still, it's not a factor which would theoretically push females to start to run their own business, but no, still this gender gap in entrepreneurship is observed. So that's why I suppose that these heterodox theories, which indicate, which show, which analyze these cultural norms, these social norms, this labor market segmentation, where women are, not only women, but in this context, women are socially, let's say, pushed to enter to some specific industries, sectors. It seems to be better in explaining, to suit better to explain this gender gap in entrepreneurship than this orthodox neoclassical economy. Even, you know, my way of thinking, my background is in this neoclassical economy.
Yeah, it's a very difficult.
Yeah, right. Because to some extent I try to understand something which looks for me to be a little bit, you know, unlogical, and that's why I needed to skip with my natural way of thinking, that if something is good for me, I do it, or if something is not good for me, I don't do it, and I need to and I try, and that's why it's still so interesting problem for me, because still in European Union, the policy of gender equality is really strong, but it's much easier to implement this gender balance in some public sectors, in some governmental, let's say, positions, etc., than in entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurs are free people. They independent decisions to start and to run their business. At least this is what I still believe in.
Okay, thank you very much, Aleksandra. Now we continue with Professor Alonso with the following questions, and we have also some question in the chat. Alonso, the second question that I want to ask you is, let's think beyond fisheries. What about aquaculture under the pandemic? And the third question, do you think there will be any permanent or deep changes in fishing practices and or the fishing industry under a post-pandemic scenario?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I have to admit that I didn't review for papers on aquaculture, but I guess that the effects should be about the same that for small-scale fisheries. It depends whether the aquaculture facilities are being managed by small-scale communities or large industrial companies. And I guess that could be similar, depending also on the type of product. Mostly fresh products are being mostly stopped from being traded. So it's a big problem also for aquaculture of fresh products. And with respect to the post-pandemic scenarios, I guess that fishing practices will remain about the same. I guess that one of the important things is to help poor fishermen and poor communities to enter the processing and trading sectors, because in many cases, poor fishermen have to sell to monopsonies, local monopsonies. So they have to accept the price that one buyer wants to give them. So if in any case fishermen have a more empowerment for processing their products and trading more freely their products, I guess that could be a way of, and any future hypothetical pandemic will affect them less, I guess. But I would say that.
Okay,
Thanks.
Alonso. We have here another question in the chat of Carlos Bustamante, I guess. One question, sorry, it's what have been the main issues to include in the international agenda among the different countries' problems?
Thanks for the question. I guess that the main issue, I guess that in the short term, the main issue here for coastal communities is to help them to obtain healthcare in their proximity of their communities. I guess that health problems with the COVID pandemic have to be addressed in the first place. In the midterm, could be to, as I was saying a while ago, just a few moments ago, that help them to overcome future pandemics or any other problems like natural catastrophes, for example, and by giving them a more empowerment into trading more freely the products. I guess that would help them in mid or longer term.
Okay, Alonso, thank you. Finally, I would like to ask you, what are your forecasting for this specific sector of fishery in Mexico after or during the pandemic? Because let me tell you that we are not finishing with this extraordinary situation. I mean, in terms of consumption, in terms of production, what about the pollution? What can we expect in this specific sector?
Good. Yes, I guess that the situation, it will depend on how this pandemic is developing in the near future. I guess an increase of cases has been observed in coastal areas in Mexico in the past few weeks, in several coastal states in Mexico. And that is a kind of worrying because many coastal communities are living in and have their livelihoods in these places where more cases have been observed. So in the short term, it looks not very good panorama because of these health issues that affect not only fishermen, but their families, the whole communities. And I guess that in the following months, it will be a difficult time still for fishermen in Mexico. And to overcome this pandemic, those cases have to be completely finished off. Meanwhile, it will be still a difficult time, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much, Alonso and Aleksandra. We have finished this event, and so I give you the word to Ida. Ida, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I haven't even planned to speak at the end of this event, but as it is final, I'd like, first of all, to thank you, all of you, for participating and contributing to this webinar on sustainability lessons from COVID-19. I think it was a nice ending for this meeting that we had over the last academic year. And I hope that we can continue our cooperation. And thank you, Andrés, for moderating this and asking questions to the presenters. I think that they were very, very relevant and also gave some food for thoughts because, well, there are many unanswered issues, and we need to think and debate on such important elements later on, especially even if the pandemic is not over. So I think that we still can continue in the next year, and we can just expand our cooperation, and we will see each other when the new academic year starts. I don't know if the representatives of the embassy would like to say anything at the end of this series of seminars, as we are three co-organizers as well as somebody from the Institute of Economic Research of the UNAM. So I'd like to give the floor maybe to Zofia Ziółkowska, who's with us now, and welcome, Zofia.
Thank you so much. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to join you from the beginning of the seminar. First of all, I would like to thank both the Instituto de Investigaciones Económicas de la UNAM and the Polish Poznań University of Economics for organizing amazing 4 seminars that have taken place since November, if I remember correctly. I believe that it has given us a lot to think about during COVID, and I hope that it will become a basis for a lot of really important research and papers and really good collaboration. So I'd really like to thank you, first of all, Izari and Ida, for organizing and doing all the hard work and getting all the speakers and getting all the moderators. Thank you so much. And thank you also to all the speakers, everyone who was able to join us. And I really appreciate all the work that you have done, and in the name of the ambassador as well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, all of you, particularly to the speakers and the organizers, and best wishes for all of you, Dulcinea.
Isalia, do you want to say something?
Oh, only say that thank you for your cooperation, and that's all.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for everyone, and
Thank you.
see you soon.
Thank
I hope.
you. Bye.
Thank you.